Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is a continuing sort of end of season update video. So I'm just picking up on plants. I'm not going to do everything, as I said in the in part one, because a lot have already been done recently, so they don't need doing again. But there are some plants that just get overlooked because they're just sitting quietly doing their thing, but not in bloom or not producing new spikes or anything. And they just get missed. They never get videoed. So that's really what I'm trying to pick up on this time round. Right, let's get going then. I've got these two out. Now these two, to all intents and purposes, are identical, but they're not. This is my plant that I've had some time now. And this is Dendrobium Farmerii crossed with griffithianum. And the one at the back is griffithianum crossed with farmerii. Now, although that sounds the same, it's not, because this one actually has pink flowers with yellow in the centre, and this one has white flowers with yellow in the centre. So if the cross is the other way round, it can produce different results. There are similarities, but different. Anyway, this one, I took this in to let the experts have a look at it, because this just didn't look right. And the consensus of opinion was that at some point in a past life it had bug damage, so bitey holes in the leaves, that then got a secondary infection and left these marks. But what I had been doing is keeping my eye on any new growths that have been produced. Now this is a new growth, and you can see there's a couple of specks on here, and this goes back to when I was back in the heat, when I had bugs basically, and these are a couple of little bite marks that were taken out when this growth was tiny. Yeah, this is a new growth. So in the main, the new growths are looking pretty good now, and we've got two more coming. So we've got another new growth pushing on here and another one here that are bug free, so in theory they should be clean. And eventually the leaves do become deciduous. You can see there's canes that have dropped their leaves, the oldest ones. So these tatty looking leaves will eventually drop off. This has bloomed once this year, but only once. The year before it bloomed twice. So anyway, it's coming on. It's produced several new growths and is currently producing two more. It's actually quite a large plant, that one. And this is the other one that came out of the big box, the cross the other way round. This has also produced some new growths this year. That's a new one. This is a new one, I think. This is a new one. So again, it's bloomed once and has produced some new growths. Now these type can bloom more than once on a cane. They tend to have nubbins that swell near the tip of the cane. You can see where old ones have been, around this area. And just because a cane's bloomed doesn't mean to say it won't bloom again. It can have another go. So don't write the canes off, basically. Probably depends on the strength of the plant and everything. But this one's coming on. It's pushed some new growths up, so it's doing okay. And it has bloomed for me. So good stuff. Now, this is my Salah Jeanne cristata. And although we looked at that not long ago, the reason for looking at it then was to compare it with the ones that Rachel had in the video I was in out in her greenhouse, looking at her cooler growers, and her plants look totally different to mine. Probably because they got a lot more light than mine get, but that was a discussion for then. This discussion, however, is what's happening with this plant. Yeah, well, all the new growths on here, which are in many different places, are nice and plump and are finished growing. Yeah, out here. Another one here, probably some around the other side, I suspect. Yeah, another big one here. Yeah, another one here. They've finished growing. Their leaves are full size. The bulbs are nice, big, fat and plump. Now's the time to reduce that watering right down, because it's going to stay soggy otherwise, because it's not growing anymore. There's no bulbs to plump up, no leaves to push on. So now's the time to slow that one down as far as the watering is concerned. And this particular Salah Jeanne shouldn't really have any food at all in the winter. It will quite happily survive on its reserves and hopefully start some buds late winter. Yeah, this one did bloom for me at the beginning of this year. I can't remember whether it had 1 or 2 spikes, but that was its first time blooming. I was just pleased to get some blooms. Well, hopefully when we get out the other side of New Year, maybe we'll get a few more blooms this time round. There's certainly some really good new growths on there. There's perfectly capable and is blooming size, but its treatment that it gets from now on could affect that dramatically. So it does now need to start drying off, quite dry in between watering, but not withholding water totally. Not for me. I don't do that to any plant. Now if I had a catasetum I might, but I haven't. One of the reasons why I don't like the flipping things. I'd probably get that wrong. But anyway, with this one, this does need to start drying off now. That's probably the last feed it's going to get this year, and that's only because that's what I had at hand. Now that will be allowed to virtually dry, and from now on it will get more of a trickle of water with no feed. Everything's mature, leaves, bulbs. It's ready to settle down for the winter now. And the lower temperatures should do it the world of good. But lower temperatures and soggy roots will not do it any good at all. Yeah, so balancing act again. Well, this is Phalaenopsis Sweet Memory, and at the moment it looks decidedly like it's got quite a serious problem. But this was in much too high a light level during the summer, and the leaves almost went yellow. Really the palest of greens. Now this plant naturally has paler coloured leaves than a lot of other Phalaenopsis, I'll give it that, but they'd got far too pale, and it's because I put the plant where I could see the blooms, and the blooms last a long time, don't they? And we did have rather a lot of light this year, so it didn't do the plant any good. And the plant is now starting to get its colour back. This is more like the colour it should be, but it's leaving it a bit patchy. So I'm not giving up on it on the grounds that it may continue to darken and become more uniform. That is possible, but it's a bit of a wait and see. You can see here the darker colour is getting back into the leaves now, but it's still leaving paler elements, and the newest leaf on it didn't grow to full size, and this one's got a distinct patchy pale base, and as I said, a reduced. But these leaves are pretty plump. You know, they're hydrated, but yeah, they look a strange colour at the moment, and the spike's been left on. It is possible that each one of these leads may extend, so I'm leaving the spike for now. But yeah, it does look a little odd at the moment. I'm just hoping that it's recovering its chlorophyll now that that light level's dropped down to a more suitable level for that plant. Yeah, so we'll see how that one goes, but I'm keeping my eye on it because it doesn't look right. But it's in, hopefully it's just transitioning from being far too much light to something more suited to it, and the chlorophyll's starting to get back into the and colour up the leaves again. We'll see how it goes. Now this little plant you won't have seen since it came out the box, basically. This was one of Alberto's plants when he had to give up his collection to move to the UK to work at Kew, and Rachel had quite a few, but I don't know whether she's communicated with Alberto, but she's lost quite a lot of hers. Whereas, I mean, I got this little tiny miniature Dendrobium that's growing a lovely root. So this is growing, this is okay. That is a miniature, that is its sort of size. These are the size of the leaves. But it's growing, so mine's doing okay. There was another Dendrobium that's mounted that I did get some rot in the cane, but I'm not sure that was anything to do with its transporting or anything like that, because I took the 2 kikis off, and the point at which I broke the kikis off rotted. That could have been down to me not sealing the wounds properly. But nonetheless, this one isn't growing yet, but it's a Miltonia, summer breeze. But there's no sign of any rotting or any problem with the plant. I'm just waiting for it to push up a new growth. Which, no, I was just going to say, which it might be doing, which it is doing. Yeah, so this is growing. And this, strictly speaking, can't be called a rescue because it's a division. It's a piece taken off of a larger plant. So yeah, but we do have a new growth on here. Just the one? Yep, just the one. And that will produce a new root system. The root system it had wasn't poor, but there wasn't much of it. So it's been surviving on its inner reserves and the bit of hydration and feed that could have come up through the small root system that it had. That new growth will produce a brand new root system now. When, I don't know. It could be after the bulb's nearly mature. It could be not long after it starts growing. So the first job is to let it get its head above the water, shall we say, and then get this sheath off. Because the new roots will come out of the base, and I don't want them following the sheath. I want them going downwards. So that'll have to come off, but not yet. Let's let this little new growth have a bit of protection for a while. And keep the water out of it. If you see an Oncidium type looking exactly like that, if I pour water over that plant, it'll go down inside that sheath and around that new growth and sit there because it's trapped. So keep your water off these delicate little new growths. Just water round. It's the roots that need the water, not the new growth. Okay, but yeah, it's coming on. Now this is, strictly speaking, getting treated as a rescue, even though it's just not growing well for me. I think it was an Odontodia, but it's Peggy Ruth Carpenter anyway. It's a well-known particular thing, and it does have gorgeous blooms. So I'm just letting it carry on and do its thing, but it's doing its thing incredibly slowly. Now this is a good example where the old part of the plant could actually be taking up some of the energy from the new part of the plant. I've got 3 old leafless bulbs there, lovely fat plump bulbs, except for the very oldest one. So these two are getting hydrated and they're storage organs. The last growth that, well, the only growth it had, this was a tiny little growth when I got it, did push on and produce leaves. And now it's producing another new growth. So it's growing, but it's painfully slow, and it shouldn't be. It should be growing more vigorous than that. So it's struggling to get off the ground, but at least it's growing. Now this sorry looking object is my Nelly red velvet, and you can see what happened to this one. This got soft rot. Took out an old pseudo bulb and got some serious infection into this bulb. Now I managed to scrape away the worst of it and put cinnamon on it and stop the rot, and it is now producing a new growth. So it's sort of made it, but I mean that's even if this new growth attempts to put a spike out, it'll get taken off. I need to get some strength back into this plant, but the new growth is just starting some new roots. So it's on the road to recovery, but I don't do well with these. I know they're cool growers and I do keep it cool, but for some reason Nelly just don't grow well for me, and yet some other Oncidium types roar away. This one doesn't. Anyway, there is hope. Well, this is my little Salah Jeanne Knitted Ur. It used to be called Orchid, I think it was, which is probably still on the label. Yeah, Orchid. Anyway, this has produced 2 new growths. Not bad. I mean, this one's the same size as a previous one. This one grew a little larger, but this year it's grown 2 new growths, and it did bloom earlier in the year. But I'll make sure when I go to the British Orchid Congress on the 3rd of November at Ridlington School, what I'll do is I'll make sure I film their plant, and then I can put a pop-up of this plant next to it. Just to give you an idea of possibly what you could be aiming at. It takes 4 people to lift it. I'll give you a clue. Anyway, mine's coming on. At least it's growing. It was very slow to get off the ground, this one, but you know, 2 new growths this year, 1 the year before, so progress. And the last of my 3 Coelogynes is Coelogyne Mooreanna. It's got a lot more to its name than that. Mooreanna, Magnifica, Brockhurst. It's one of the large whites. It's classed as a large white. Now, this took a while to get going. Struggling with a poor root system, but it made up for that. Produced these 3 new growths last year, 2 of which bloomed. Spike's still on there. I'm reluctant to take these spikes out. I'd rather they dropped off naturally because they go right down into the crown. So if I cut those off green, there could be some rotting, so I just let those dry off totally. Eventually they will just pull out, at which point they will have calloused over. And what I've got now is a new growth coming on here. No reason why that shouldn't bloom. Another new growth here, and there's one buried in the middle of the plant as well. So I have got 3 new growths. Hopefully they'll bloom, because as I said, I now have a root system on this. It's a bit of a monster. This is good because I've still got some left. This is what happens if this doesn't get hydrated. It's the equivalent of the concertina leaves. They're just crumpled. They will not open properly. Now those are on older growths. So that was when it didn't have a root system, and quite honestly those were there when I got it. But the leaves that I've produced since then on these new growths, they didn't get that curled up look. Yeah, so they came out quite clean, and yeah, and I'm not getting any sign of it on the latest growth so far. But hopefully we'll get some blooms on that. But an unusual blooming methodology for Salah Jeanne. It comes straight out of the centre of the bulb between the 2 leaves. A lot of Salah Jeannes produce their spikes from near the base of the bulbs, and consequently many are pendulous or arching, whereas these stick straight up, which is good. They don't need staking, and they're plenty strong enough to support the blooms as well, because they're pretty large. So that one's coming on, and at least it's got some roots this time. But unlike the other 2 Salah Jeannes that have finished growing for the year and now need to be kept quite dry through the winter, this one is in active growth. So I've got to carry on watering this one, but I've got to take care now the days are getting shorter not to keep it soggy wet. Yeah? Hydrated but not soggy wet. So I don't want to lose the roots I've got. I worked hard to get them. So coming on, and hopefully blooms to come. Now this Dendrobium is infundibulum crossed with lowii, and this is a black hair type. This isn't growing bad, but it ought to be growing better, and the main reason probably is that it hasn't been out of its pot since I bought it. When I bought it, it was in bloom and it had no signs of new growths, and because it was new to me I didn't know at what point new roots would come out. Anyway, it did. After it finished blooming, it produced 2 nice new canes, one of which bloomed. Blooms last a lovely long time, so this was in bloom earlier this year, and I was just about to say, and it's about time it started doing something, because it's been sat a little bit doing nothing for a while, but looking down inside the pot there's a lovely strong new growth coming up the middle. Now, irrespective of the time of year, as soon as I see signs of new roots coming out anywhere near the base of that plant, it's coming out of its pot, because it's been in there a long time and I don't even know what it's in. But because it came from somebody I know that they tend to use a mix of bark and, well, what you would call small pebbles, grit, that sort of thing. So it's going to be a very airy media in there. But a lot of the aerial roots are failing. They're not doing as well. They still hydrate okay, but I'm looking for new roots on that, and as soon as I see them it'll get repotted. It might even get mounted, decision to be made when it comes out of the pot, but yeah, bought in bloom, bloomed again since, and a new growth starting, so not bad. Now, out of the 2 new growths that it grew, in theory they both should have bloomed, but one didn't. Yeah? Now they ought to have. It's a blooming sized plant, yeah, so obviously not as strong as it ought to be, and the reason will be down in there, bet you anything. So I'll deal with that as soon as I can. And this is my Ronco Reedus Bangkok Sunset Variety Fragrance. Well, if it ever blooms again I'll let you know. This is just being stubborn. Difficult to work out why. It's growing well. I moaned a lot at the beginning of this year about its complete lack of root production, living off of a few pretty feeble roots. Well, this year it has grown quite a few new roots, so I'm certainly not complaining about the roots now. It's pushed out quite a few. It's losing its oldest leaf at the moment, so that one's going to drop. but then it's grown 3 new ones this year. Yeah, 2 and a third one pushing out now. So that's good. So more new leaves than old ones dropping is always good. But there is no sign of a spike on this, no sign at all. And you've got to go steady with these, because although it's a vandaceous type, they don't tend to like the level of light that normal vandas do, and they can burn. So it may be not blooming because it's not getting quite enough light. So I might, now that the shorter days are coming, I think I'm going to increase the light on that, because the chances of burning it now are pretty slim. You know, the strength is starting to go out of the sun, and it's getting lower in the sky. So it was in bloom when I got it, although it was a very poor spike, and it didn't last long either. So I think I might just do that today, just get that up in better light, but not too dramatic. As I said, if I put that up where the vandas live, which is a section of roof with no shade netting, it might burn, so I don't want to go too mad. But I think I might try increasing the light on that and see if we can induce a spike before the days get so short that it looks like it's got its sunglasses on. Dark shades. We'll see what we can do. Well, this is my Encyclia cordigera. It's a named variety, Hsiang Yu, complete with accompanying fern, which I must get out of there at some point. Now this one has grown quite a few new growths. We've got a small one here, one up in the centre of the plant, another one in the centre of the plant, another one on the edge here. So it has grown some new growths, and its blooming size, it has bloomed before, but not for a while. I won't call it a mistake, it was a good idea at the time, but when I first got this, it was pot bound, and it was in bloom. It goes back a while as well, and I was reluctant to disturb the roots, so what I did was I potted it on. So I put the root ball complete with its old media into a larger pot with fresh media down the side, and some roots grew into that fresh media, but all the roots in the centre of the plant died because the media was breaking down, and continued and broke down. So it took out the centre root system, so I had to grow a new one, which took a while. But it's there now, it's got a reasonable root system now, and new growths progressively produce more and more roots, which is more a keeping with the size of the plant, because it is a reasonable sized plant, and with a poor root system it was struggling. But it's getting there now, so should get some blooms on those new growths when they mature. They're not there yet. I mean, if you look at some of the size of the older bulbs, yeah, the younger ones have still got some work to do. That's probably the one that's farthest progressed, and this one here. So hopefully some blooms on these latest growths, but it's coming on now, and it's still producing new roots from the new growths. So it's getting a much better root system now. So it should be a good, much better plant next season. But it's pulled on quite nicely this season, which is good. Now this little bulbophyllum is actually labelled wrong. This arrived in the box with the Brassocattleya Meike. I'll get there in a minute. Come on, brain. And it has bloomed, and when the bloom came out, it was blatantly obvious it wasn't this Tingaburinium. It's not that, it's something else. Nonetheless, the blooms were quite attractive, irrespective of the name. And this is doing stuff. This growth here has something coming out the side, as does this one, as does this one, as does this one round here. So there's 4 new things on this plant, which, given the number of bulbs it's currently got, if those are all new growths, that's going to double its size. So this is pulling on nicely now. It's produced quite a few roots down into the pot, some visible near the base of the bulbs, but it's growing on nicely now, and it's a nice little miniature bulbophyllum that doesn't have the elongated rhizomes, you know, the big gaps between the bulbs. They're quite tight. So anyway, there's 4 things growing. I'm not going to say they're all new growths, because there may be a spike in amongst them, we shall see. But it's growing nicely now, it's coming on well. Okay, that'll do for this one, mainly because the fans have come on and they're noisy. Let's walk away from them and they don't make quite so much noise. So again, a variety, bit of a mixture. More to come. There will be a part 3, possibly a part 4. But given that I've filmed an awful lot already, you know, as not part really of this end of season update thing, but they were filmed recently enough to not bother again. Probably 3 or 4 parts this time. Hopefully with some bits and pieces in between to break it up. So hope you've enjoyed it, including the plant names in the description this time. I didn't do it last time, I didn't have time, but this time I have got time. You know, anybody searching in on plant names should get a hit. And yeah, one thing I will mention is that as I'm going along, I know some people that have been watching some time probably know my plants as well as I do. And obviously on the last one I'll say, right, that's it. So if your favourite plant's been missed, just give us a shout when we get there and I'll include it. On the grounds I had no plans on filming every single plant this time, so I may miss somebody's absolute favourite one. But we'll get to that when I've finished and I know how many parts I've got. I've done most of the filming now, it's just a matter of putting them together. And this is part 2. I want to include pop-ups of blooms this time and also plant names in the description. And just do it a little bit better. The first one was a bit rushed, quite honestly, so I've got the time now, so certainly this one and subsequent ones will be a little more polished, shall we say, rather than me just picking the camera up and pointing like I usually do. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.